Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in March. Alright guys, so March ended up being my best reading month so far this year. I read 25 books. I had one DNF. Most of the books were actually dark romance, although I did read a lot of fantasy romance, and then there's one YA fantasy thrown in there. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about all the books I read in March. Alright, I'm going to start off with the DNF just to get out of the way. I read Hate by Tate James. So this is a reverse harem, like MMA romance following our main character, Madison Kate, who ends up being at the scene of a crime during this gang fight. And she ends up being the scapegoat, and she ends up, I think, going to live with like her aunt for a while. When she comes back to town, she finds out that her dad has remarried and his 3 sons, I guess, are living in her house. And it's kind of like a bully romance. So I only had 3 chapters left when I DNF'd this. I don't know if my expectations were too high. It just read very, very young to me. I kept forgetting that our characters that we're following are actually in college. They acted like they were very much in high school, and I just couldn't get into this. I also really didn't love Madison Kate. She just didn't feel like a very strong main character, and I didn't love it. However, a lot of people love this series. I saw on TikTok a lot of people that loved Zodiac Academy or raving about this series, so I think it's worth giving a shot. Personally, it just wasn't for me. Alright, so moving into YA fantasy, the only book I read was Gallant by VE Schwab. This is following our main character who is living in an orphanage. However, she has a journal from her mother that she reads every day, and it talks about this place called Gallant. And one day she gets a letter from her uncle saying, "Come home to Gallant, we miss you." So when she travels to Gallant, it's like a mansion, she finds out that no one there was actually expecting her. And not only that, the heir currently living there wants her to leave. So then she starts to find out the mysteries of Gallant. And it was a very interesting story, but overall, I thought it was okay. I wasn't completely captivated by it. It took me a while to finish it. It is a pretty short read. I thought the atmosphere was very beautiful. I liked the writing. I just wasn't super into the story, I guess. But overall, it's a solid YA read. So if you want something, I would honestly read this probably in the fall or autumn. It definitely has those vibes, but it's VE Schwab. So once again, the writing is beautiful. I recommend picking it up. Personally, it just didn't really amaze me in any way. And I forgot, I did actually read one adult fantasy, so I read The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I have a full spoiler-free review that I'll link in the cards and in the description. I loved this. So I say in that review that I listened to the audio version for the newest edited version. Apparently there's some differences between the indie published and the new one, but this is following a group of 6 strangers that are all very proficient in their own unique type of magic. And they end up all going to this school where they're working to become the members of the Alexandrian Society. But out of the 6 people that are chosen, only 5 end up moving on. So I very much enjoyed this. I thought it was really fun. I do see that it's being recommended as like romance fantasy. There are some romantic moments, but I would not call this a romance fantasy. This is very much like adult fantasy. But overall, I really loved it. So definitely check it out if you haven't yet. Alright, so moving into fantasy romance, first up, I'm going to talk about my most anticipated release that I read, and that was The War of Two Queens by Jennifer Elle Armentrout. I have a full spoilery discussion I'll leave linked in the cards in the description. I enjoyed this. So I can't say very much about this because it is the 4th book in the From Blood and Ash series. I will say this was getting a lot of hate on Goodreads. I don't think any of that was called for. I liked the way the story progressed. I like what happened to the characters, and I didn't mind that certain thing that happened. But overall, I enjoyed this. I did have some issues with the writing and the pacing. I think this was very slow paced. It took me a while to get through, but overall, it was still a very good read. So if you are a fan of From Blood and Ash, I would definitely continue with the series, and I cannot wait to read the next book. It's going to be so good. All right, the next few books I'm about to talk about, I've already mentioned in my spicy fantasy romance book video that I'll leave linked down below. But I thought I read this book in February. Apparently I read it in March, and that is A Ruin of Roses, and this is by K.F. Breene. So this is following our main character, who's a fae, who's living in this village that has been cursed. And these fae used to have these separate animal personalities that they were able to like shift into, but because of the curse, they're no longer able to do that. Also, this curse is forcing or not forcing, but the fae are dying at a very early age. As soon as they hit adulthood, they're withering away. So our main character ends up finding a cure to save the people, or at least prolong their life so they don't die right away. And she uses flowers from this forbidden forest in order to do that. So one day when she's going and collecting flowers, she ends up being taken by the beast that guards the wood, and he takes her back to his kingdom that is just full of demons, and the story goes from there. Overall, I was not a huge fan of this. However, I think if you are a fan of Beauty and the Beast retellings and you like a lot of spice, you will love this. I didn't love the writing. I did really enjoy the story. It was just the spicy scenes were written in a way that I wasn't a huge fan of. But overall, also the characters sounded a bit younger, that I think they're supposed to be in their 20s. They sounded kind of young, like they were in high school. And there's a lot of vulgar language. Normally, that does not bug me. For some reason, it did with this book. But overall, if you're a fan of Beauty and the Beast retellings, I would definitely check this one out. And next up, we have To Bleed, A Crystal Bloom, and this is by Sarah A. Parker. I love this book. So this is following a girl that when she was very young, she survived a brutal massacre of her family. She's the lone survivor, and they were all killed in this very gruesome way. And the High Master actually ends up being the one that finds her, and he takes her back to his kingdom, and she stays in this tower, and she's really isolated. The only people she really talks to are the High Master and a few of his servants. So as she grows older, she's just dealing with the trauma and the isolation and fear she's been carrying since the original event. And then every night she gives a drop of blood in a goblet to the High Master, and she's just yearning for his affection, and it's so good. So highly suggest, if you're a fan of Rapunzel retellings, check this out. I will say it is very confusing. The entire time I was reading this, I was like, what is going on? And at the end, you still don't have a lot of the things figured out. However, it is part of either a duet or a series. The next book will be coming out later this year. So I'm so excited to check that out. And next up, it was actually a reread for me, and that is Fortuna Sworn, and this is by KJ Sutton. So this is following our main character, Fortuna, who is a nightmare. She's the last of her kind. When she touches you, she has people see their deepest hidden fears. And she has been searching for her brother for the last 2 years, and then one day this mysterious fae shows up on her door and says, I know where your brother is, but if you want my help, you have to marry me. And it goes from there. So she ends up venturing to the Unseelie Court, and it's just so much fun. I forgot how much I love this series. I had planned on reading the second book, Reckless Slumber, this month. I didn't get to it. I'll definitely be reading it next month, and hopefully the third book. And I'm just so excited to continue with this series. I really do love it. And last up for romance fantasy, we have The Never King by Nikki St. Crowe. This is a very dark reverse harem Peter Pan reimagining, and definitely check trigger warnings before jumping into this. But every 18 years, Peter Pan comes from Neverland and kidnaps a darling, or one of the descendants from Wendy Darling. So in this book, we are following Winnie, and it's pretty much the story of her seducing Pan and the Lost Boys. There is also a fae element, which I didn't know going into this, and I was very impressed by the amount of like backstory and just story overall from this book. This is a very, very short book, as you can see, and I really love the story. So I believe this is either part of a duet or series. The next book is coming out later this year, and I cannot wait to jump into it. All right, so moving into dark romance, I read so much dark romance this month, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I think I ended up reading 16 or 17 dark romance books, and 6 of them were actually from the same series. So I read the entire Motorcycle Club Fallen series by Giana Darling. This is the 4th book, my favorite, Inked in Lies. I loved this series so much, so I actually just filmed a full video, completely spoiler-free, just talking about the different characters, all the different books, the reading order, and then the different tropes that are in each book. But I'm obsessed with Giana Darling. I love her writing. I love the way she writes relationships and just the angst. Oh my goodness, so good. So definitely check out that video. It should be coming out, I think, the Thursday after this one is posted, and I just really, really enjoyed this entire series. Also, I forgot to mention, if you guys end up binging the entire series like I did, you might want to check out Peace, Love Books and Live a Novel Life. They're currently doing a read-along before the newest book, Caution to the Wind, comes out in that Fallen series. So I will leave both their channels linked down below. Now, another series or duet I read by Giana Darling, that was amazing, is I believe it's When Heroes Fall and then When Villains Rise. It's a mafia romance duet. Oh my goodness, it's so good. So it's following Elena, who had a very troubled life living back in Italy. Her father was Irish, but he had a lot of issues with the Italian mob. So then she ends up moving to America and she becomes a lawyer. Now she's kind of the black sheep of the family. And although she is super strong, she's very worried about how other people perceive her and their perception of her. And her sister is actually a model and ends up asking her if she will represent Dante, who is the head of the Italian mob, in court. And although she does not want to do this, she ends up representing him, and then the story goes from there. I loved Elena's growth. So I am typically someone who does not love the main character. I normally very much prefer the love interest. I loved Elena in this. She's just so good, probably one of my favorite female MCs. So definitely, if you like mafia romance, check this duet out. All right, so the next 3 are all mafia romances. So first up, we have Ruthless Creatures by J.T. Geissinger. So this is following a woman whose husband ends up leaving. I believe it's on their wedding day or the day before their wedding. And she's just in a huge depression over the fact that her fiance has been missing. And then a Russian hitman mobster ends up trying to kill her, but she doesn't realize it, and then they end up forming a relationship. I was not a huge fan of this, mostly because I felt like the insta-love in this was a tad ridiculous. I think I'm okay with insta-love in fairy and like fantasy romance because they can kind of explain it away with being like, oh, they were mates, or there was some sort of biological reason why they fell in love instantaneously. That didn't happen, or that did happen in this book. They literally, there's like 2 minutes of them getting to know each other and they have instant chemistry. I don't know. I also didn't love the writing. There's a lot of humor. It just wasn't my thing. So I was not a huge fan of this. However, a lot of people are really loving it. Apparently the second book is really, really good. I started it and ended up putting it down. So it might just be a me thing with this author. But definitely if you like mafia romance, I would still give it a shot. And next up, I read The Maddest Obsession by Danielle. This is the second book in her mafia romance series. Oh my goodness, I love this book so much. So it is following our main character, Giana, who ended up being, I think, in an arranged marriage in the very beginning to this older man. He ended up cheating on her with her best friend. And then after he dies, she has to go into another very loveless marriage. Now, the entire time she's been marrying these different people, she's kind of been plagued by this FBI agent named, I think, Christian. And they always have a very like bully enemies relationship. And then one day they end up sleeping together and it goes from there. I loved their relationship. Everything about Christian was just amazing to me. It's definitely Grumpy Sunshine, and it's so, so good. So if you enjoyed the first one, The Sweetest Oblivion, you'll definitely enjoy The Maddest Obsession. It's not my favorite in the series. I will talk about that next, but still so good. And last up for Mafia Reads, we have The Darkest Temptation by Danielle. This is by far my favorite in the series. It is also the darkest in the series, so please check trigger warnings. So this is following Mila and Ronan. So Mila is the kind of spoiled daughter of someone who's very high up in the Russian mob in the US, and she ends up traveling to Russia, where she is captured by the head of the Russian mafia that is stationed in Russia. And it is captor-captive. I actually just filmed an entire video of different captor-captive recommendations because it is one of my favorite tropes. And slowly they start to form a relationship. But this is just so good. I love Mila and Ronan together. I just love everything about them. Their banter, it's just great. So highly recommend. If you have not read it, check it out. Like I said though, definitely check trigger warnings. It's very, very dark. And next up is probably the darkest book on this list, and that is The Ritual, and this is by Shantel Tossier. So this is about a secret society in a college. So we start out freshman year, we're following this boy who joins a secret society where he essentially becomes like a hitman and he has to prove his worth. And then his senior year, he gets the one assigned to him, and that ends up being a girl from campus who has to vow to do pretty much whatever he wants to her. And it goes from there. This was interesting. I felt like it didn't need to be as long as it had to be. Definitely a lot of spice, a lot of steam. Definitely check trigger warnings. There's some non-con, there's some dom, BDSM stuff, but overall, I liked it. There is also a Spotify playlist that goes with this that I listened to while I was reading it. It was really good. So I recommend if you are a fan of very dark romance. All right, so moving into contemporary romance, there's a decent amount on this list. First up, we have The Deal by Elle Kennedy. So this has been on my radar for a while. However, it is new adult romance, and I tend to shy away from that. However, I'm so happy I picked this up because I loved this. This is following Hannah, who when she was younger, she had SA, or this very traumatic event, and it's been weighing her down all through college. She's very much afraid to go out and party and lose control, and she's also a brainiac. She's super smart, so one day when the entire class is taking this test, she's the only one to pass, and Garrett, who is our love interest, notices. Now, he is a hockey player. His father was actually a very famous hockey player, and he's been kind of living up and trying to compete with that reputation, and he needs to pass the test in order to continue to play hockey. So he asks Hannah to tutor him, and it goes from there. Oh my goodness, I love this. This was so much deeper than I thought it was going to be and emotional. I was crying at the end of this. Definitely give this book a shot. I very much enjoyed it. It was really good. Unfortunately, right after I read The Deal, I read The Mistake by Elle Kennedy, which is the second book in the series, and it was very underwhelming. I actually don't remember very much about it. I know we're following Grace and Logan was in the first book. He's the best friend, and he really just wants a relationship, and he ends up almost sleeping with Grace their freshman year, and then he realizes that he actually might have more feelings for her than he thought, and it goes from there. It was very underwhelming. So overall, I wasn't a huge fan of The Mistake, but definitely still pick up The Deal. All right, and the last three books are all by the same author. They're all sports romances by Mariana Zapata. So first up, we have Kulti. So this is an age gap romance. We are following a girl that when she was younger, she idolized this soccer player. Her entire family did, and she actually grows up to be a pretty good soccer player herself. And then the player that she idolized becomes her coach, and he is just very grumpy and very standoffish, and they eventually form a relationship. I loved this when I read it, but now having read the two other books on this list, this is probably my least favorite. I love Mariana Zapata's writing. They're always very slow burn. This especially felt slow burn. It took a very long time for this relationship to start, but I love a good age gap romance, and overall, this was a very solid read. And then next I read The Wall of Winnipeg and Me, and this is about football. So we are following our main character, who has been the assistant for this famous football player, and she's worked for him for years, and they've never really had a good relationship. He kind of takes advantage of her, and then one day she says that she is going to quit. So it ends up being a marriage of convenience. The football player, I believe, is from Canada, and he's trying to stay in the States, so he asks her to marry him, and it's just they're fake dating, and eventually a relationship blossoms. I love this. I thought this was so fun. I think I read this in a day, and it's decently long. I just love the banter and back and forth between the different football players. There's also a best friend roommate football player that's living with the couple, and I love him. I believe he actually has his own book, which I will be reading in the future, but overall, this was a very fun read. And last up was my favorite out of the three, and that is From Lukov with Love. So this is following two ice skaters. So our main character, I will say, I agree with everyone who says they absolutely hate this main character. She is very, very annoying. However, I loved Ivan enough that I was able to deal with her, but she is kind of like a failed figure skater. She used to be a part of a partner team. They ended up leaving her last minute, so she's been trying to do solo, and it's just not working out. So Ivan, who is her best friend's brother and a very well-established figure skater, asks for her to be his partner, and it's them training together, and I love this. I love Ivan Lukov so much. I actually listened to this on audio. Really good. Definitely check it out, but this is probably one of my favorite Mariana Zapata books. All right, guys, those are all the books I read in March. Please let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books, which are your favorites, which ones didn't you like. I love when you guys leave comments. Now, I said this already, but I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.